Well, we're going to do chapter 5 today, I guess. One of the things that happens when I teach ethics is that one of the theories of ethics is called emotivism. And emotivism is the view that that is moral which people have feelings of pleasure about. And things are immoral if they have feelings of pain about it. So anything that provides pleasure or pain would be either good or evil, good or bad, right or wrong. Well, it seems to me that that is going to create all kinds of problems. Because if morality is reduced to personal points of view, how long is it going to take for people with different personal points of view to get crossways with each other?
Measured in nanoseconds.
Yeah. And the more people get crossways with each other, that critical mass builds. And so you get these humongous interpersonal conflicts, and there's no way to resolve them because you're basing it on emotion. So it began to occur to me that we needed to transform pleasure versus pain, which is a subjective phenomenon. It is unique to each person. I mean, somebody may experience pain in a circumstance that I would hardly even notice. Others would experience pleasure in situations I might not even notice. Maybe my pleasure threshold is a lot higher than somebody else's. The other problem is, how do you define what a pleasure is? So in ethics, we make a distinction between hedonism and utilitarianism. I guess I'm flirting with going beyond what I need to go beyond, but I need to make that distinction. Hedonism is the view that that which is moral is what I experience as pleasure. And I really don't care whether it causes you pleasure or not. I don't really care if it causes you pain or not. Because the only relevant factor is whether I experience pleasure. If it is, then it's good. If I experience pain, then it's bad. So it's entirely personal, it's entirely individual. Now, I think we can see that is not going to work. You are not going to have a cohesive society if you predicate your notions of morality on personal points of view about pleasure and pain. So there was a corrective to that. I mean, hedonism is still with us. I mean, it probably controls this culture more than anything else does. But the other point of view is what we call utilitarian. And the utilitarian point of view says, no, you don't look at pleasure versus pain in terms of personal pleasure or pain. You look at it in terms of aggregate. So, if more people experience pleasure, then it is good. If most people experience pain, then it's bad. So they defined it as what they called the greater happiness principle. And it defined good as that which is the greater balance of pleasure over pain in the universe. the greater balance of pleasure over pain in the universe. Well, okay, it's an aggregate function. You know, if more people experience pleasure, then it's probably okay. If most people experience pain, then it's probably not okay. But now you've still got a problem. Do any of you remember the Tuskegee experiments on syphilis?
Isn't that where they...
No, it's not the airmen.
Well, they did their experiments on Black African Americans.
They went into Appalachia and they discovered or found significant quantities of black folks who had syphilis. Now, at the time, we knew how to cure syphilis. But the experiment was, we're not going to treat it because we want to see how the disease develops. So they didn't treat any of those people who they knew had syphilis. Now, what were the consequences of that? Do you suppose those people, I mean,
and died.
Even the people who had syphilis didn't know syphilis was what they had. And so what they did was they conducted their normal lives in a normal kind of a way. And so what do you suppose? Do you suppose that disease transmitted?
Normal or customary?
It wouldn't matter much whether it was with my wife or whether it was with any of a number of other people. And what about the babies? I suspect that there were some babies. Now, that was exposed in the New York Times, and people just went absolutely ballistic over it because it's inherently immoral, isn't it? The justification for it was, well, you can exploit a minority by allowing it to experience pain on the justification that more people will experience pleasure because we have learned something about these people's pain.
Collateral damage.
Yeah. A necessary evil. Now, utilitarianism will allow that to occur because utilitarian has defined morality in terms of the greater balance of pleasure over pain in the universe. Well, I have to say that would not be a Christian position based on the things that the four holiness principles that we have been put forward. Those would be absolutely awful. So, I begin to think, well, there's a couple of other reasons. One is that the range of pleasure versus pain is too big. In the universe? Are you kidding me? The other one is if you have to wait until after you act in order to determine whether or not the act produced more pleasure than pain, you can't do anything about the act because the act has already occurred. And the effects of the act are already in the system and cannot be retrieved. It's the old case of Pandora's box. Well, the point I want to make here is that we have to impress upon the consciousness of any disciple that they have the moral duty to consider the potential effects of any action that they're thinking about undertaking. Because if you act according to one of your choices, there are certain effects that are going to occur and you will not be able to alter them. Now, once you start realizing that, then pleasure versus pain goes away because that's subjective. What we're talking about, the effects of an action, are objective.
Okay.
Now, I hope that people will experience remorse when they've done something stupid. And not all of them will. I mean, I'm pretty sure the doctors that were involved in the research on the Tuskegee syphilis experiments say, hey man, it's just my job. Just my job. I'm just doing my job. I'm a lab tech. They told me to do these blood tests. That's what I did.
That's what some of the Nazis said when they killed the Jews.
Sure. Mengele told me to. Well, do you cooperate with evil? And I think you have to say no. Well, I'll lose my job, I'll lose my mortgage, my kids won't go to school, I'll be an embarrassment to my community. Yeah, well, so what's your point? Mm-hmm. I mean, a man of integrity like Job, I am not going to compromise the principles of holiness for anything. They are absolute, they are objective. Now, that was a very difficult thing for me to try to get across to a couple of sections of Indiana State ethics students. They were majoring in IT, engineering, sociology, medicine. And they had a personal ethical code that said pleasure is the most important thing. And if anybody is not contributing pleasure to me, then they need to find somebody else. Because I need people to provide me with pleasure. So if you can't meet my needs, you need to hit the road. So that's a formula for alienation, isn't it?
The me generation.
Yeah, yeah,
Most important.
yeah. And I don't care what the fallout is. I don't care. Nothing to me. Except you end up isolated. Other than that, it's fine, I suppose. So we begin the search for objective factors. And what I've tried to do, I was sitting down at what was the Village Garden a few years ago, getting ready for class, and I thought, man, we've got to turn this subjectively oriented ethics into an objectively oriented ethics. There has to be some objective way of determining the effects so that we can choose how to act so as not to create negative objective effects. So I came up with this list of 8 factors. What factors, the question that orients all of this is, what factors enhance human well-being? And I came up with 8. The first one is physiological factors. And a physiological factor is a factor which promotes a human being's capacity for health. You do not have sufficient well-being if you're sick. Now, what are the factors that contribute to health? Well, I think nutrition and probably exercise. These seem to be, as I go through this, I think, well, duh. It's pretty superficial analysis, Davis. Can't you do any better than that? But not really. When you stop and think about the health factor, what kind of industries do you suddenly open up?
Medicine.
medicine,
Yeah.
pharmacology. How about the manufacture, the design and manufacture of medical equipment? I mean, you can think about, I've wondered sometimes, how in the world did somebody figure out the blood pressure, how to measure somebody's blood pressure? And how in the world did they figure out the blood pressure had something to do with what the person's health? First thing they do when they get into in the medical chair at the doctor's office is clamp that blood pressure thing on it.
Sphygmomanometer.
Huh?
Sphygmomanometer.
Oh, is that what it is? You do and you'll clean it. You do and you'll clean it up. Yeah.
I was going to say, is that what I heard? Speak or what?
It squeezes you.
And they get
me too, but I don't call her sphygmomanometer.
and they get two readings. And one reading says one thing, and another reading says another thing. And I don't, tell me the number. I'm okay, I guess. But somehow it's important. And he goes through, he takes blood out of my arm, and all of a sudden he gives me all the numbers. It tells me who figured that out? That those were the critical factors from my blood that tells me the condition of my. And tell me your cholesterol's too high, or your bum is too high. And I said, well, I'll lower it if I can, but drink more water. Yeah. Okay. How long did it take us to learn all that? 300 years ago, we know that? When does a guy learn about the circulation of the blood? When did that occur? Nobody knew that the blood circulated? I don't know what experiments he did, but he got this idea and he think, I wonder. And that wonder is something I'm going to call conceptual transcendence. Humans are the only species that can conceptually transcend their environment, such that they can see what the potential effects of any given action are. You have to be able to discern what the effects of an action are going to be. You have to be able to deliberate it before you act on it. Well, how does that work exactly? Well, you look out into the universe and you say, well, when this happens, this happens. I do this again, that happens again. I do this again, that happens again. I deviate this a little bit and I get a slightly different. I ask myself, well, what made the difference? Because I expected the same thing, I didn't get the same thing. Well, I didn't put the same input in as I got the output. My mind is doing what? But I am trying to figure out the way the universe is so that I can figure out how people can thrive in it. Now, I can't do medicine. I'm thankful for people who can. So, health, nutrition, you bring peach cobbler. Pizza.
That's natural sugar.
Yeah, it's natural sugar. Yeah, along with the cup of the white stuff. 2 cups.
Wow.
That is a well-being factor that has to be considered. And so when we choose a career, that's a holiness-driven career choice. That's where I'm going with this. A holiness-driven career choice.
How do you define what is considered holy?
holy,
I mean,
anything that conforms to the well-being of human beings. If you look at the law, if you look at the Torah will say, do this, don't do that. And if you examine them in terms of this notion of well-being, I mean objective well-being, not personal pleasure or pain, you'll say, well, okay, I guess it makes sense that they didn't know about trichinosis. Isn't that what pigs? Trichinosis, yeah. They didn't know that, but God says don't eat pork. Well, I mean, they don't have refrigeration, they don't have purification, they don't have a whole lot of things that would purify that particular thing. And so he says, well, no, you just stay away from it. I would put forward the conjecture that the commandments in the law are designed to maximize human well-being. Whether it's health or it's interpersonal stuff. Maybe we can go on to the other one, environmental factors. That was a physiological factor. Environmental factors. What kind of an environment is necessary for a human being to thrive? I once read, some time ago now, Marx had written a book in the 1840s in which he objected to the ghettos in London, the slums of London. He objected to the fact that urine and feces were running down the street and the kids were playing in the mud puddles. I'm thinking, well, yeah. So what do? Okay, now sanitation procedures come into the play. What does it take to process human waste such that people don't get sick when it's in their environment? Wouldn't that be an environmental factor to take care of? Do you dump toxic material into open streams?
Okay.
And because it diminishes well-being